Hello and welcome to another episode of Mashable Pakistan Lab. Today we have with us Razi Ahmed. He is the founder and CEO of the Lahore Literary Festival, and this is the perfect timing to have him on board for a session because the eighth, if I'm not wrong, the eighth session of LLF is going to start over this weekend from 18th February onwards. Hello and welcome, Razi.
Hello, Fatma. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
Okay, so before we just jump into the details of what's in store for us for this year's LLF, I would like to take a pause and sort of go back to when the festival started in 2013. Because that was a time in Pakistan where, events and international, specifically events where, we could have some international guests was still starting out. It was still Pakistan was reeling out of its, the political image that we had. So just share how the idea came to you that this is something that you guys need to restart in Lahore and Pakistan, and the process that you guys as a team went through.
This was in 2013, and this year it's going to be our ninth edition, although it's
All
what.
right. Yeah.
When in 2013, I was recently my home city, and it had been a city that had always known as a child to be one full of festivity and of street melas, of book fairs, of the horse and cattle show, of the kite flying festival, and so much more. So there was a constant, vibrant milieu, especially around the spring season. And we had started noticing, including our friends, myself, that for the past few years in 2013, there had been a real reduction of public events. People had withdrawn to private spaces. The sense of coming together as a community had become sort of almost riddled with fear, and that had to be contested because there's only so much that you can take up to a certain point in terms of the fear-filled dynamics. You have to live your life, and there are places like Beirut and even Palestine and so many other remarkable places that have shown tenacity and resilience through some of the adverse periods of their history. So Lahore still hadn't been that bruised, and I thought, there's a city which still is extraordinarily vibrant, yet it's not got a platform through which it can be celebrated either locally or internationally. And this is also at the same time when you had big stars from the writing world in Pakistan like Kamla Shamsi and Mohsin Hamid, who had started making ripples internationally, including in India. But to be honest with you, as far as I could recollect, in Lahore itself, there weren't any public interactions with these authors. So while they were being celebrated internationally, they weren't being celebrated here on our turf. And just to sort of like also contest the sort of conspiracy theories that were constantly being hashed about the East and West, and how we were becoming more and more inward looking, that all I think came together as the rubric for creating a platform like the Lahore Literary Festival. And in 2013, when it started out, we weren't terribly sure of what sort of numbers we'd clock in terms of the attendance. It was quite a remarkable turnout. Over 2 days, we had over 35,000 people. Tariq Ali was our keynote speaker, and at around 9 a.m., I popularly retell this story because it was really something of a sheer, delight just to see so many people queue up outside the Alhambra in the heart of the city, and it was a rainy morning. So just to see people, like having this sheer curiosity and thirst for knowledge and to regale in an atmosphere where ideas can be celebrated, I think that was the sort of eye opener for all of us that this is something that Lahore should have had. I mean, at the time of the creation of Pakistan, it came about belatedly, but thrilled that this is what we all wanted to bring in international stars so that they can also see Pakistan for what it is, but at the same time celebrate our own creativity, whether it's in English fiction or Urdu fiction or through sheer art and activism. So any form of creative expression became sort of the lightning rod through which creativity at the LLF was celebrated and further championed here and abroad.
That's like having attended I think most of the events that happen, I can sort of agree to the sort of ambience that that event has, and the sort of energy that revolves around it, and the excitement around whenever the announcements are made. Supposed to be, and you were you rightly pointed out the fact that, when our new contemporary English fiction writers, Pakistani fiction writers, when they have started making these ripples, we could see events happening abroad where people were getting to interact with them, and sort of they seeing the other side of the story of from Pakistan. But unfortunately, we were not really able to interact with these authors, and this was a very good platform. um, I would like to ask another thing, because you mentioned that the platform, although it is mainly focused on authors and writers, the general idea was to help celebrate any form of culture and art, and art sort of makes its way into LLF, because you guys always there at the event, at one of the spaces at Alhambra. There's section where either at some point, I think the National History of Museum or some form of exhibition of the new artists or old ones, there is a space where that is being celebrated. So how did that, was it intentional, or did something spontaneously happened and then it sort of picked up, okay, this is going to be an integral part of it?
So I don't see literature divorced from art, and I see great implications and intricacies that in difference. And that's the beauty of calling it the Lahore Literary Festival, that celebrate different forms of expression, whether it's image, text, or sound. Art, I feel, has inspired literature, and the other way around. Some people see imagery as the way forward in terms of understanding nuance of human behavior, whereas others are more comfortable with audio textbooks. Yet the more conventional reading community would go for the books in their sort of old state manner prior to Kindle. So really, the idea is that art becomes central because it inspires us, it shapes us. So many that I've personally spoken to, who we've hosted at the Lahore Literary Festival, are also artists, and they've been art history. They're avid observers of the city. So unless and until you don't understand the city, the creative forms of expression, how on earth can you really do justice to portraying the city? I thought that I was very privileged to have had the opportunity to have taken Orhan Pamuk on a tour of the city. And at that time, Fatma, we also had the wonderful Lahore Biennale underway
Yeah.
in the. So it was really a moment to celebrate, just to see Lahore shining through these multiple spaces and forms of creativity that were realized over those 2 weeks of February. And the LLF was just over a weekend, but we were able to see the collective goodwill and effervescence that two major platforms that are striving to, foster a sensitivity to the arts could do, and the sort of cumulative effect that these two platforms in terms of coverage had for Pakistan internationally. So really art does feature quite significantly annually. We have an array of visual arts sessions, and they're quite to a large extent inspired by literature. For instance, Faiza Butt, an artist of British Pakistani heritage, she came to LLF, and we had her with a wonderful writer and also an art historian. So that's the idea, just to break beyond these imposed boundaries of distance and to allow yet more cross pollination of thought from working across these lines. I've felt that these dialogues through the platform that we have actually nurtured more minds to think out of silos and allow for more cross cultural and cross disciplinary collaborations.
So when you, as I also mentioned in the start, obviously I'm gonna assume that with time it has been easier to sort of approach, international authors and ask them to come and interact with the Pakistani audience. But just not to like pinpoint any specific author or any specific event, but in general, when you approach international authors in the, and I would I'm asking this in a very specific pre-COVID world time when they were expected to actually come and visit in person. So what was their reaction? How was it in generally? Was it like a positive thing, or was there some reluctance that had to be sort of they had to be like sort of convinced that they this was something that they would really enjoy doing once they experience it firsthand.
So when we started out in 2013, it was an uphill battle. There weren't that many people to consider Pakistan as a place to travel to. We primarily focused on diaspora writers like Bapsi Sidwa and Tariq around created a suitable buzz, and that was a point of further developing our platform for the next few years. It became a stepping stone towards persuading people to come to Lahore and share their ideas, their new works, and also explore the city. So, tourism became an important angle through which we started inviting first time travelers to Pakistan. Because of the terrible perceptions that the country had had at that point, there were bomb blasts going on across our cities, and terrorism became unfortunately synonymous with our country. So there were dire straits that we had to surmount, but luckily, over the years, over the goodwill that we maintained, some of the good coverage that we were able to draw out in the international media with own really went a long way. And I think those press clippings that we started, enclosing along with our publications became a confidence builder for many time travelers to consider Pakistan and see it for what it is, as a place of creativity, eclecticism, of vibrant bazaars, and also where there's so much interest in terms of how the youth is coming up and gravitating towards books. We see it annually at the Lahore Literary Festival. There are new books coming out. There are new publishing houses coming out. Of course, it cannot be overnight. It's a gradual process. But from the point we were in 2013 till 2019, you'll have noticed that there's a smattering of new publishing houses, more new fiction, yet more translations, and more powerful, confident voices emerging from the youth, willing to address some of the challenges that they're otherwise contesting in a wayward manner. But they found an angle to through the creative means and through the LLM and other platforms that there are in the country.
So, any fun from like again, now that we live in a world where we sort of market with the pre-COVID world and the post-COVID world that we live in. From the pre-COVID times, any fun incident that sticks with, be it any year of LLF that stuck with you and you would like to share that happened, some audience interaction, some author interaction, anything.
Well, we've had incredible speakers, and they've always, enchanted the crowds. There have been moments where we've had audiences in Hall One flowing beyond the capacity that is permissible. So, with the scenes that were created at Alhambra in Hall One and Hall Two in particular, and Hall Three as well, there'd be people slamming on the doors. There'd be people violating the fire norms. We'd have so many students who'd volunteer every year from the Lahore Grammar School and schools, including HSN, Government College, and the Punjab University. And you'd see that the students were being, it was insurmountable, the kind of like pent up excitement and curiosity so many of these attendees would have. And they're willing to just, defy all the norms that we had set. So a lot of the authors would find that very funny, that this kind of like rock star, response we get nationally. So it's really encouraging, exhilarating, but also frightening just to see the numbers, crashing in the halls and see people, like in such a chock-a-block atmosphere. So, I mean, they've been in daze and they've often had a giggle about it.
Yeah, I remember. I think those specifically Hall One events too that stick with me are specifically. I think one is with was Tehmina Durrani's session. That was my mother and I sort of were there. We were actually attending a session before that, and we sort of got stuck in the hall because we it was like you can't get out of it. You just have to listen because influx bada aa raha hai. So that was an interesting memory for me as well. So moving on to this year, again, post-COVID world that we live in, and the fact that like every other national or international event, LLF is also going digital. So how did you feel that transition? Because I know that even before the festival, during the when you were sort of in a lockdown format, you guys were doing these digital sessions on Facebook as well. Was it sort of preemptive preparation for LLF's digital thingy, or was it a separate program? And how did the transition was for you guys specifically? We all, I think, sort of had to like take up some. Everybody had a tech upgrade sort of a thing. Even people who were not really interested in tech had to sort of get used to it really quickly. So, how was that transition for you guys?
Well, it was an uncharted territory. I was very fortunate to have a young colleague who's been extraordinary in taking up the challenge, and she's now looking after the entire digital footprint of the LLF, Iman. We started out in June. We weren't terribly sure, as I said earlier, but one by one, bit by bit, it started coming together. And over the summer, well, we had north of 30 sessions, and it became a nice portfolio. And all
Yeah.
these roughly, like in terms of quality, edited, we incorporated the LLF logos, and then they were made available for free on YouTube. So looking back at that, it made me really convinced that we ought to do a whole scale digital festival. And we weren't, of course, terribly sure of what sort of an audience we generate, how to go about in terms of addressing the digital costs. There are, of course, digital costs because
Yeah.
are going to be edited. The only drawback to this I found is that we've had to purge the Q&A, which is of course
Yeah.
a terrible downside. But there was going to be a trade-off. So in case we were going to address the lack, in case we were going to ensure that the quality is maintained and there weren't any technical glitches, these sessions over multiple time zones had to be pre-recorded. And now
Mhm.
editing stage in terms of quality editing. So once they're up from say 18th till the 21st, you'll see that there's a noticeable qualitative difference from the ones that we had done over the summer. So
Mhm.
sort of learning, we learned on the job. We were willing to take on the challenge, and you know, as the momentum picks up every January, we are very fortunate that yet more well wishers and volunteers come around the time of the LLF, and they want to support, nurture, and champion the sort of goals that we strive towards. So again, a good team in terms of being, round the clock, diligent, and ensuring meticulous, seamless communications between different speakers and moderators, often in different
Mhm.
times. So it hasn't been very easy, but it's certainly worked out quite well. We've been fortunate. We've actually recorded around 36 sessions. So we've surpassed the number that of the summer series. And
Mhm.
I'm sure lots of people will find them interesting. There's a lot of variety of sessions, from food to history to politics, and a lot of literature. So,
Yeah.
but all these years we've been approaching prominent writers in the contemporary literary firmament. Often we've had rejections, but we keep persevering, and it's a matter of persevering and persuasion that may then finally crystallize, say, after 5 years of one invitation after the other. But in this case, remarkably, a lot of people held a hand They seemed to know what the LLF was about. They had heard about it. They had read of its coverage internationally, and it was just a delight and a sheer fillip for all of us when we started getting invitations from dream authors. I mean, from Jhumpa Lahiri to Gabriel to Elif Shafak, and it really then made us, yet more motivated that we've got to do it in a manner that would be befitting that of a true festival. So, how to transpose that sense and sensibility of a real festival to the digital space, and hopefully by the time we start lining up our sessions, and it's going to be a clockwork process, God willing, you'll all be pleased. So, yes, it's been a challenge, but it's truly worked out quite miraculously well.
And best of luck and really looking forward to it. I was going through the schedule that you shared before we started this conversation. And also, they were very interesting, a mix of conversations that I think you guys have listed. But I think a thing that was different from the previous sessions was there are a lot of book launches on this one, and I think that would be an interesting aspect of it as well. So yeah, really looking forward to it. You talked about you just mentioned the how that international coverages also helped sort of with time sort of opening up the idea of the fact that international authors started to see that Pakistan does have an audience that's worth exploring and everything. LLF has previously done sort of I don't know, should I call it like an offshoot or a spin-off of the festival in other countries as well. So what was the motivation behind that? How did that go about? Because that was, I think, also something that's sort of unique to LLF, not just when it comes to the literary festivals in Pakistan, but with some of the other key literary festivals around the globe. We see this is not something that they do. This was so. How did that idea came about?
We're the only ones, as far as I know, from Pakistan that have taken the festival to London and New York,
Yeah.
and always try to do something with a standpoint that ought to be sustainable. We forged these partnerships with Asia Society in New York and British Library in London. It's too bad that we couldn't stage offshore sessions and the editions that we do in London and New York last year because of COVID-19. But we will be back hopefully once circumstances permit in both the cities, and possibly even take the east, because again, as stating earlier, we are interested in fanning out the message of Pakistan as a place of contemporary relevance in terms of creative expressions. There's so much coming out from this country annually, monthly, weekly, and that's something that we've got to recognize. And the world also must start embracing this kind of like remarkable nation of 220 million people that keeps spawning yet more talent, and whether it's literary or in terms of music or artistic, but you constantly keep seeing new voices. And I think that's where we feel that the LLF, by going abroad, holds these interesting facets of Pakistan to places where often there's a thought about the country. So, with both the cities in New York and London, you also have, of course, a vibrant and a vast diaspora population. And to then also recognize people from within the diaspora members is something that, yet builds bridges. We do feel that we've got to bring in more faces from abroad to Pakistan. There are so many incredible role models, whether it's Riz Ahmed or Saida Warsi. There are people who should be better known in this country, and because of the very close knit relations between UK and Pakistan, I feel that by taking it to London annually, we can also hopefully percolate the message to the communities further away in places like Bradford and Manchester. So the desire is again emanating from the viewpoint that Pakistan's perceptions should be bolstered, its reality should be better mirrored, We're, of course, very critical in some of our sessions as well. It's not all meant to be celebratory, but the critical component itself is indicative of a vibrant thinking community. And that's the message which we really want to take annually to different parts of the world.
Yeah, and I think that hopefully once I don't know, in a more COVID-free, I don't know if we can call it a COVID-free world, but a more manageable post-COVID world, we will see you guys grow in that direction as well. My last question would be sort of how LLF. I think there are two parts to this question. One, if you could share how for each year you would, because I know there is not always a generic theme about a festival. There's a very mixed sort of conversations that go about. So how do you guys, what are your goals? What are the markers that you set that you think that, in this one specific festival, these are sort of conversations that we would like to highlight? How is that decision made, and how do you approach that? And secondly, is there space, or I know that young authors do get a space in the fact that people who have like debut novels, they can sort of they get a space at the LLF this year. I was going through your schedule and I saw Sabah Kareem Skyfall will be a book launch session. But other than that, for example, people who have just are thinking of looking for platforms, they don't really have sort of hardcore material out. How can they sort of approach LLF and sort of maybe get some guidance or get some support with their work?
Sure. So taking your second part of the question first, every year, actually, it started out in 2019. We were fortunate to have had a creative writing workshop conducted by Fatima Bhutto, and it was a wonderful response from across the schools and colleges of the city. There were around 60 to 70 students who took part in that workshop, and it lasted for 2 hours. And it was really so wonderfully conducted because Fatma Bhutto was able to work it out with different students in terms of the points of growth, where they are at a certain trajectory, and how they can be, taken from that point to the point of being published. So she inspired our young aspiring writers. We've also had a creative writing workshop in collaboration with Iowa Writers Program, which is one of the most prestigious bodies in creative writing. And all these are done without any paywall or being or anybody having to be charged for it. So we will, of course, every year start bringing in more creative writing workshops. And the very idea of the LLF is, to be honest with you, as we look back at it, a sense of being able to be inspired by some of the best and the brightest. And that's why we make such an extensive effort at trying to bring out some of the key names from the literary community in Pakistan and abroad, whether it's Abdullah Hussain Sahib, who passed away recently, Intizar Hussain Sahib, and many others. But the idea is really that, if I'm a student at HSN College or LUMS, I should be able to have a platform where I can go without any extensive or barriers to entry, and just be able to assess for myself and see whether I'm getting that literary inspiration or even that inspiration to strive to become a better citizen. Um, a lot of the students who may not potentially be studying literature, who may be enrolled in engineering and business programs, could potentially also find a catalyst through literature. And that's where I feel the beauty of the festival is, that as a free, public, or an open platform, you really allow a lot more people to come into the ambit of the festival and see how it could potentially, influence is sort of cell in your brain. And at some point down the road, you may just feel that's where my source of inspiration actually came from. So these festivals are not meant to be, measures of hard power. They really shape who you are over a passage of time. And when people start, getting into the nitty gritty of, indicators and impact assessment, it sounds too much of a consultant's report. I feel that this is meant to be a celebration of the human soul and human beauty and a sense of the community coming around the values that we all champion. These values are of humanism, and these values are shaped by powerful forces in the arts and literature. So really every year the attempt is not to necessarily have as such a specific thematic structure, but to bring in a panoply of voices that could really shape us for who we are, to be inspired by who they, as human beings, are, and they're sort of sources of creative sparks, and the hours and days and weeks on end effort that it takes to put together a novel, a poem, even a painting or a series of paintings is something that is, I mean, fascinating when you start decoding, deconstructing a writer's process, and each one has a different process. It becomes every time more intriguing. We've had the fortune to actually uh, hear from people like Jhumpa Lahiri, Amitav Ghosh, Sebastian Fox, Amin Malouf, and Jan Martel, among others, this year at the LLF to talk about their writing processes and how they coped with the pandemic and what their hopes and aspirations are, and how they shape us to be sort of citizens who can still be hopeful in spite of the terrible circumstances that we've experienced. And I hope we come to that point where more and more of us are vaccinated. But really, it's about the collective hope and inspiration that a body like Lahore Literary Festival can foster amongst the young and old and across our city.
And on this positive note, we'll wrap it up. Thank you for your time. Really looking forward to this year's LLF, and hopefully next year we'll be back at Alhambra doing it bigger, better, and sort of interacting in person. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.